Welcome to another entry in the Hyrule Compendium. Today our topic comes from viewer Taryn Carter. Taryn's question, I guess you could say, is I think Nintendo needs to drop the timeline.
More of a statement than a question. I mean, I think the timeline, the overarching timeline is it's turned into more of a niche for some Zelda fans who like to explore the lore, and this was in particular the case before Hyrule Historia came out, where they were trying to piece the games together themselves by taking evidence from specific games where it fits, and it was like a massive puzzle piece, a bunch of puzzle pieces trying to fit together, and it was fun, it was exciting. It was not for everybody, and I know there's a lot of people that kind of just dismiss it, push it aside, but it was for a lot of people that the lore is what draws people into the series, and that's important. I do feel that Nintendo has kind of dropped the timeline. I don't feel that they've really been working on the timeline for a long time, and some of the stories, particular Skyward Sword, was very timeline oriented in that they sort of brought some things together and made some references. They clearly tried to give some more backstory to the lore. Other games, I think Breath of the Wild is one of those examples where it's like they could have put that game anywhere, and it didn't really matter.
We see things that exist in that game that are from all the different timelines. Without saying it, they're kind of like, this game is just its own thing.
Specifically, they give the game its own backstory that doesn't connect to the stories that happened before it, or presumably.
Normally, with the ones that do connect but have a larger backstory, it'll be like, this is 100 years after Ocarina of Time.
Right. So the Wind Waker backstory is Ocarina of Time. At least they piece part of it from there. Whereas Breath of the Wild created its own backstory, immediately making it a fairly independent game from the rest of the series.
And they were sure to be like, this one thing happened 10,000 years ago.
I think the game does make references to where the game can fit in the timeline. Most notably comes with that one memory where this is when Zelda is like, I think he's knighting Link.
Whether skyward bound, adrift in time, or steeped in the glowing embers of twilight, the sacred blade is forever bound to the soul of the hero.
So that is a direct lineage of Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, which occurs in one of the timelines. So that, implies that, to me at least, that game took place in that realm, in that world. And you know what? That's great. They didn't need to explore everything about the history. I mean, it would have been nice to see some more connections, I think. To specific events. That would have been, cool. But, there's things that don't even fit when you think about it. Like, there's the Mirror of Twilight just hanging out by that town where there's a shrine quest for it. It's like, why is that there?
I think most other games that exist now, when they make a sequel or something like that, or the next game in their series, it usually is a sequel or a prequel. It's not just on a timeline, but it's directly related to other games. And I think they don't ever want to do something like that.
Yeah, they've always felt, I think, that their games have been independent stories where you can jump into the game right then and there, and you won't feel lost, you won't feel like you're missing anything. And I think that's true for the most part. I don't think any Zelda game could be your first Zelda game. Whereas I think if you're jumping into, I'm going to make some assumptions here, but if you're jumping into Uncharted 4, you might lose a little bit because some of those characters are same characters from the previous games, and why are they together, or what happened to that person? And you lose something when there's a character that comes back in the fourth game or third game who was from the first game, and you're like, oh, am I supposed to know that already if you hadn't played the previous games?
It's good for fans of the game, but for new people, it won't attract them. It'll confuse them maybe a little bit.
So that doesn't really happen in Zelda. On occasion, we get references to things, but you're not really missing out if you don't know the series. And the games are very independent of one another. So in that sense, I feel that Nintendo has dropped what else could they do to fully drop the timeline? they could have done whatever they wanted to do in Breath of the Wild with the time lapse that it had, where it gave its own unique backstory that has nothing really to do with much of the history of the series. Little bits, but it's a very independent game. It totally, the lore of the Zelda series did not affect how they made that game, I don't think.
It is interesting to see them do that in Breath of the Wild when the last game they did was so focused on the timeline. Well, not the last Zelda game, but the last major console Zelda game. But also around that time is when the Hyrule Historia thing happened too, right?
Right, yeah, shortly after that.
Why do you think around that period they were so invested in, like, here's the timeline? And
well, I think the inclusion of the timeline, they were putting out that book and they felt that was the time. I don't know. I think they did put more effort into bringing the stories together, I think, with Skyward Sword.
Yeah, I almost got the vibe at the time, like, they were saying from here on out, you're gonna know what the canon of the game is. But then Breath of the Wild is the opposite, I think, of that. But now looking back on it, in hindsight, I'm thinking, well, maybe they did that not as publicity, but to, like, get some Skyward Sword hype, Like, there is a timeline, and Skyward Sword, strongly fits into here.
I think part of it is they had this timeline or some sort of skeleton version of it. Maybe it had reached a tipping point where there were more people that wanted them to release it, as opposed to... Because there's a lot of people that wish that Hyrule Historia never came out. They like the mystique of having that different opinion over where a game fits and how they connect to the other games. And, as the more games have come out, it's sort of pieced itself together a little bit more. Outside of that downfall timeline, that was the curveball that threw a lot of people off.
Yeah, I'm still not a big fan of that necessarily.
I'm okay with it, because I always viewed from the get-go that A Link to the Past was a sequel to Ocarina of Time. Nobody doubted that when there was only 5 games.
Yeah.
And then when Wind Waker came out, everybody knew that was a sequel to Ocarina of Time. But then what happened to A Link to the Past? That was also a sequel. And then Twilight Princess came out. Now it's like, oh, we have a split timeline. But what about A Link to the Past? That was still a sequel to Ocarina of Time. Mm-hmm. Like a distant sequel, and there was more, pieces of this puzzle now. But so they never sort of addressed the fact that A Link to the Past was not a sequel to Ocarina of Time, and it just went into about like a 10-year void. And then they released Hyrule Historia, like, oh yeah, by the way, A Link to the Past is still a sequel to Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, you said now that they're not focusing on the timeline, but I think for a while they never really were,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And they're like, oh, we gotta make sense of this.
It's clearly, I think, one of those things that's in the last 1/3 of development of the game, I think, where they got the engine down, they got the models down, they got the what the game looks like, and they're like, all right, what do we want to do with this game?
I kind of like that Breath of the Wild is so up for an almost interpretation. A lot of people are debating it still. If they keep releasing games like this and don't say where it is on the timeline, we can have a whole new realm of discussion of where these games fit till we get the second timeline published.
Even with they released Hyrule Historia, now there's another book coming out. I forgot what. I don't know if it came out in Japan, but there's not an English version yet. I forgot the name of it. Mm-hmm. Very loose information here. But then they're almost retconning where like Link's Awakening and the Oracles tie in with the Link to the Past. Bit sketchy details here. People will know more than me on this one, but I know there's some issue with this. They're releasing a new book that almost contradicts some of the stuff
in Hyrule Historia.
Interesting. It's already out in Japan, but it's coming out in the US eventually.
Okay.
So it's like sometimes I think they don't even have a full grasp of it, them being Nintendo.
Do you think they based some of their ideas on like fan opinion they read on like Zelda Dungeon forums?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm sure there was some influence there. The community as a whole.
So what do you think about them having published in Hyrule Historia now that we're a couple years removed from it?
I think it was fun to read. I like it. I like that they tied things together. I like that they presented more information than we knew before. There's some new details in there that we didn't know. They just expanded on the lore. For a series with as much lore as there is, that's always a good thing. I look forward to more of those types of releases. It's a good, because that's not related to a game. but it's a good thing to like tidy you over a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just more material. We're reading the manga right now, and I feel like I know more about the series now. So there's people that just like to eat this stuff up, and you don't have to be a fan of the timeline. You can just totally ignore this stuff if you want to just play the games.
Definitely.
For Zelda fans, there's so many more different realms of possibility of how you can enjoy the series. It's no longer just playing the games.
So they shouldn't drop the timeline.
Oh.
Yeah, let us know how you feel about the timeline. Let us know what other topics you'd like us to discuss. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe. And thanks for watching. So like we mentioned before, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. That'd be awesome. If you want to follow us and know when we have new videos, you can click the subscribe icon over here. Also be sure to check out all our other playlists we have. We have more of the Hyrule Compendium. We have another series where Mas and I read the Ocarina of Time manga called Zelda Book Club. And of course, the Zelda Informer podcast. Check all that stuff out. Hope you enjoy it. And thanks for watching.